Sometimes the biggest victories aren't about who has more power, but about who uses their power more wisely. This is exactly what happened when India played smart and the United States was left surprised. When we talk about the element of strategy over strength, we are talking about an approach that values brain over brawn, patience over impulse, and foresight over raw force. In the modern geopolitical arena, it is not always the nation with the largest military or the biggest economy that secures the most meaningful wins. It is often the one that knows how to position itself, how to time its moves, and how to anticipate the reactions of others. This is precisely what India demonstrated. Rather than engaging in head-on competition with the United States in areas where the US has long enjoyed dominance, India chose to maneuver in ways that were subtle, precise, and calculated. The first sign of this strategic thinking came from India's awareness of its own strengths and weaknesses. It understood that matching the US dollar for dollar in military spending or trying to outpace American technological giants in the short term would be impractical and counterproductive. Instead, India focused on strengthening critical areas where it could build sustainable influence, sectors like information technology, pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, and space exploration. These are areas where innovation and expertise can outweigh sheer financial muscle, allowing India to create leverage without directly challenging American superiority. Timing played a key role as well. India recognized that the global order is in a period of transition, with shifting alliances, economic uncertainties, and growing skepticism toward overdependence on a single superpower. This moment provided an opening to expand influence without inviting open confrontation. India waited for situations where the US needed cooperation, whether on climate change, supply chain resilience, or regional stability, and used those opportunities to negotiate from a position of strength, even without matching American might. It was a diplomatic dance in which every step was deliberate. Alliances were another critical piece of this strategy. Rather than relying solely on one partnership, India diversified its relationships, maintaining constructive ties not only with the US, but also with Russia, the European Union, ASEAN nations, and African economies. This multipolar approach gave India flexibility. It could agree with the US when interests aligned, but it could also pivot toward other partners when that was more advantageous. The US, accustomed to expecting a certain degree of alignment from friendly nations, found itself dealing with an India that would not be easily swayed or pressured. Perhaps the most sophisticated element of India's strategy was its ability to make moves that appeared cooperative on the surface, but quietly advanced its own independent agenda. For example, engaging in defense deals with the US, while simultaneously boosting its own domestic defense manufacturing, meant that India benefited from the partnership without becoming reliant on it. Similarly, participating in US-led initiatives while also promoting its own regional projects ensured that India's influence was expanding on multiple fronts. In essence, strategy over strength means recognizing that the most decisive victories happen before the battle is even fought. India didn't need to match the US in every metric. It needed to shape the environment in which those metrics mattered. By doing so, it didn't just hold its own, it shifted the game entirely. That is why the US was surprised. It wasn't outmuscled, it was outmaneuvered. Economic diplomacy as a weapon is not about waging war with bombs and bullets, but about using trade, investment, and economic partnerships to achieve strategic goals that might otherwise require political or military pressure. For India, this approach became a central pillar in advancing its global position, without stepping into overt confrontation with the United States. The method was simple in appearance but complex in execution. Turn economic cooperation into a tool of influence and turn influence into a form of quiet power. India recognized early on that in the interconnected global economy, nations often wield greater leverage through financial networks, resource access, and market size than through traditional displays of force. Rather than seeking to challenge the US through military or ideological rivalry, India focused on becoming indispensable to global supply chains and trade flows. This meant expanding its role as a hub for IT services, pharmaceuticals, renewable energy technologies, and manufacturing. The world's dependency on India in these key sectors translated into diplomatic capital. Every trade deal, every joint venture, and every export market became another layer of security and bargaining strength. One of the most effective aspects of India's economic diplomacy was diversification. India did not restrict itself to deepening economic ties with a single country, even when relations with the US were warm. Instead, it built partnerships across continents, strengthening energy ties with the Middle East, increasing trade with Southeast Asia, collaborating with the European Union on green technology, and maintaining a steady flow of defense and energy cooperation with Russia. This broad web of economic relationships gave India multiple fallback options, ensuring that no single partner, not even the US, could dictate terms without considering the consequences of alienating a valuable player. India also understood the importance of negotiating from a position of demand rather than supply. It became a market that others wanted access to, 1 billion-plus consumers with a rapidly expanding middle class. When companies and countries lined up for investment opportunities in India's infrastructure, manufacturing, and tech ecosystems, India used this interest as a bargaining chip in broader diplomatic conversations. The US, seeking access to Indian markets for its corporations, found itself in a position where concessions in trade discussions often carried implications for strategic cooperation as well. Another subtle but powerful tool in this economic strategy was India's role in global governance forums like the World Trade Organization, the G20, and BRICS. By positioning itself as a bridge between developed and developing nations, India gained credibility as a voice that could mediate on trade disputes, intellectual property issues, and sustainable development financing. This role increased its ability to shape rules that would benefit its long-term growth, sometimes in ways that the US did not expect or fully approve of. Through all this, India never abandoned cooperation. It embraced it. But it did so on terms that quietly shifted the balance in its favor. By using economic diplomacy as both shield and sword, India showed that influence in the modern world doesn't always come from having the loudest voice. Sometimes it comes from holding the purse strings, setting the terms of access, and ensuring that every handshake leaves you just a little stronger than before. This was the kind of smart play that left the US surprised, not because it was hostile, but because it was effective. Ask ChatGPT. Technological self-reliance is not just about building gadgets or launching satellites. It is about securing the ability to innovate, produce, and control the flow of critical technologies without depending on others for permission or supply. For India, this was more than an economic or industrial goal. It was a matter of strategic independence. In a world where technology drives not only growth but also geopolitical influence, being self-reliant in this arena meant the ability to shape national destiny rather than having it shaped by external forces. This shift in approach caught the United States off guard as India gradually moved from being a technology consumer to a technology creator and exporter. The journey toward technological self-reliance began with recognizing vulnerabilities. For decades, India had imported advanced defense systems, high-end electronics, and critical industrial machinery from other nations, including the US. This dependency meant that in times of political disagreement or global crisis, India could face supply chain disruptions or strategic pressure. Rather than accepting this as an unavoidable reality, India committed itself to building its own capacity, whether in defense manufacturing, semiconductor production, artificial intelligence, or renewable energy systems. The idea was simple. If you own the tools, you own the future. In defense technology, India invested heavily in domestic research and development. The creation of indigenous missile systems, fighter aircraft, and naval vessels signaled that the country would no longer be content with simply buying from foreign suppliers. Collaborations with global defense companies still took place, but they increasingly involved technology transfers and joint production within India. This ensured that even when working with the US or European manufacturers, India gained long-term capability rather than short-term hardware. The technology sector beyond defense followed a similar trajectory. In space exploration, the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, achieved landmark successes such as low-cost Mars and lunar missions, placing India in an elite group of nations with interplanetary capabilities. These feats were not just scientific milestones, they were statements of competence, showing the world that India could achieve complex technological goals without relying on the budgets or infrastructure of richer nations. This was especially surprising to the US, which had long been accustomed to leading in these fields. In emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and renewable energy, India began positioning itself not only as a user, but as a global competitor. The country's IT sector shifted from providing outsourced services to developing proprietary software, AI models, and cybersecurity solutions. Domestic startups and research institutions increasingly became sources of original innovation rather than mere implementers of foreign designs. The government supported this shift through initiatives like Make in India and Digital India, which encouraged homegrown production, digital infrastructure expansion, and the nurturing of tech talent. By controlling the means of production and innovation, India reduced its susceptibility to sanctions, export restrictions, or intellectual property traps that could be used as geopolitical weapons. This kind of independence meant that negotiations with the US and other powers could take place on more equal terms, free from the leverage that comes with technological dependence. It was a quiet but powerful move, one that replaced reliance with resilience. In the modern geopolitical game, technological self-reliance is both shield and spear, shielding a nation from coercion and giving us the power to take initiative on the world stage. India understood this and acted early, leaving the US surprised not by defiance, but by the sheer speed and scale of its progress. The smart use of global platforms is an art that combines diplomacy, timing, and messaging to maximize influence without necessarily expanding military or economic commitments. For India, this art has become a key strategy in projecting itself as a global leader. Instead of relying solely on bilateral relations or regional alliances, India has increasingly used multilateral platforms such as the United Nations, G20, BRICS, SKO, and climate change summits to amplify its voice, shape international agendas, and protect its national interests. This approach has allowed India to be heard on matters that matter most, while also building alliances that extend far beyond traditional partnerships. One of India's smartest moves was to use these platforms not just for attendance, but for agenda setting. In international diplomacy, those who shape the conversation often control its outcome. India understood that being present at the table is not enough. One must influence what is being discussed. For example, during its presidency of the G20, India placed a strong emphasis on issues like sustainable development, digital inclusion, and reforms in global financial governance, topics that resonated with both developed and developing nations. By doing this, India positioned itself as a bridge between the global north and south, gaining credibility with both camps. India also demonstrated strategic timing in when and how it voiced its positions. Instead of reacting impulsively to every global issue, it chose moments when the world was already paying attention to amplify its messages. This was evident during climate negotiations, where India presented itself as a responsible yet pragmatic player, committed to sustainability but mindful of the developmental needs of emerging economies. The US and other developed nations were often taken aback by India's ability to argue for environmental responsibility without compromising its growth priorities, winning support from many countries in the process. A significant part of this smart use of global platforms lies in coalition building. India consistently works to gather support from groups of nations before entering high-stakes negotiations, ensuring that its stance is backed by collective strength rather than isolated opinion. This has been particularly effective in trade talks at the World Trade Organization, where India's leadership in representing developing countries has given it bargaining power that even large economies must acknowledge. Another subtle aspect is India's ability to use these platforms for narrative control. International forums offer the opportunity to counter negative portrayals, highlight domestic achievements, and present the country as a progressive and forward-looking democracy. India's speeches and policy proposals are often crafted not just to persuade governments, but also to appeal to global media and public opinion, expanding influence beyond official diplomatic circles. By leveraging these global stages, India avoids over-reliance on any single bilateral relationship, including with the United States. This independence of voice and position keeps India unpredictable and hard to pressure. The US, accustomed to certain allies aligning closely with its policies, has had to adjust to the reality of an India that participates actively in its initiatives, but is equally engaged with platforms where American influence is less dominant. In the end, the smart use of global platforms allows India to multiply its influence without multiplying its risks. It turns every summit, every conference, and every multilateral gathering into an opportunity, not just for presence, but for power. And that is the kind of subtle diplomacy that leaves even the most seasoned powers surprised. Ask ChatGPT. Soft power with hard impact is the ability to shape perceptions, inspire trust, and influence decisions through culture, values, and ideas, while ensuring that this influence produces tangible strategic benefits. For India, soft power has never been an afterthought. It has been an integral part of its global rise. What makes India's use of soft power distinct is the way it blends centuries-old traditions with modern achievements, creating a multidimensional image that appeals to both emotion and reason. This approach has allowed India to win allies, attract investment, and project stability without coercion. And in doing so, it has surprised powers like the United States that are more accustomed to traditional hard power diplomacy. India's cultural depth is one of its most visible forms of soft power. From yoga and Ayurveda to Bollywood and classical dance, India's heritage resonates with audiences worldwide. These aren't just cultural exports, they are gateways to building relationships. Yoga, for example, has been embraced in more than 190 countries. And India's leadership in promoting International Yoga Day at the United Nations was not merely symbolic. It positioned India as a promoter of holistic well-being in a world grappling with stress and health crises. Such initiatives foster goodwill that can be leveraged in political and economic conversations later on. Education and intellectual exchange form another pillar of India's soft power. Indian universities, research collaborations, and academic exchange programs attract students and scholars from across the globe. This creates long-term influence as alumni of Indian institutions often return to their countries with favorable views of India's society and governance. The presence of a highly skilled Indian diaspora thriving in technology, medicine, and academia further extends this influence. The Indian America and community in particular has become a bridge between New Delhi and Washington, subtly shaping policy debates and strengthening bilateral ties without direct government intervention. India's democratic values and pluralistic society add another layer to its appeal. In a time when global trust in governance models is shifting, India's image as the world's largest democracy, capable of holding peaceful elections involving hundreds of millions of people, serves as both an inspiration and a diplomatic asset. This resonates strongly with countries navigating their own governance challenges and offers a contrast to more authoritarian models. The US, which has long promoted democracy abroad, finds in India a partner that shares this value but presents it through a culturally distinct lens. Modern achievements have also reinforced India's soft power impact. Successes in space exploration, affordable medical technology, and digital governance demonstrate that India is not only rooted in tradition, but is also forward-looking and innovative. When the world saw India land a spacecraft near the moon's south pole at a fraction of the cost of other nations' missions, it challenged stereotypes and earned admiration. These moments inspire confidence in India's capabilities, making countries more open to cooperation. By combining cultural richness, educational outreach, democratic values, and technological achievement, India wields soft power that delivers hard results, whether in attracting strategic partnerships, gaining support in international forums, or building economic ties. It is a quiet yet powerful influence, one that cannot be measured by troop numbers or GDP alone, but by the willingness of nations to stand with India. That willingness, cultivated through decades of cultural diplomacy and modern accomplishment, is what leaves even the most prepared powers, including the United States, unexpectedly impressed. Balancing global relationships is one of the most delicate skills in international diplomacy, requiring a nation to maintain strong ties with multiple powers that may not see eye to eye with each other. For India, this approach has been a hallmark of its foreign policy in recent years, enabling it to secure strategic, economic, and security benefits from diverse partners without being drawn into exclusive alliances. In a polarized world, this ability to walk the diplomatic tightrope has surprised countries like the United States, which are more accustomed to allies taking clearer sides in global disputes. India's balancing act begins with a firm commitment to strategic autonomy, the idea that foreign policy should serve national interests first, without being dictated by the agenda of any single partner. This principle has allowed India to simultaneously strengthen defense cooperation with the US, maintain deep energy and defense ties with Russia, expand trade with the European Union, and enhance partnerships with Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Such diversity in engagement ensures that India is never overly dependent on one source for critical needs, be it energy, technology, or military hardware. One of the clearest examples of this balancing strategy is India's relationship with the US and Russia. While India has increased joint military exercises, defense technology transfers, and intelligence cooperation with Washington, it has also continued to purchase advanced weapon systems and oil from Moscow. Even during periods of heightened US-Russia tensions, India has resisted pressure to sever these ties, instead using diplomatic channels to explain its position and protect its interests. This has conveyed a clear message. India values partnerships, but not at the cost of its sovereignty in decision-making. Similarly, India's engagement with China reflects a nuanced balance. While border disputes and strategic rivalry remain significant challenges, India has kept certain channels open for trade and regional cooperation, recognizing that economic interdependence can coexist with security vigilance. By not completely isolating Beijing, India maintains room for negotiation and avoids the risks of an uncontrollable escalation, even while strengthening partnerships with countries that share its concerns about China's rise. India has also been adept at leveraging multilateral forums to maintain this balance. By participating actively in groupings that include the US, such as the Quad, while also engaging with BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where China and Russia play major roles, India keeps itself at the center of multiple strategic conversations. This positioning allows India to influence outcomes in different arenas without committing exclusively to any one geopolitical bloc. Economics plays a crucial role in this balancing act. Trade and investment links are spread across regions, making it costly for any single partner to attempt economic coercion. Whether it is attracting US tech investment, importing Middle Eastern energy, or exporting pharmaceuticals to Africa and Latin America, India's global economic footprint reinforces its diplomatic flexibility. By refusing to be drawn fully into any one camp and instead cultivating diverse partnerships, India has enhanced its bargaining power, increased its resilience, and secured a level of strategic independence that few nations can claim. This careful, calculated balancing of global relationships is not just a matter of survival, it is a form of power in itself. And it is precisely this independence of action that has left the United States and many others both surprised and impressed. Ask ChatGPT.